second half of chapter 11, which I realize there's a picture of the windmill on the front. I could barely sleep that night and was out the door before the rooster even crowed. When I rounded the kitchen, Gilbert and Geoffrey were already standing by the tower. "Look who decided to sleep late," Geoffrey said. I was so happy to see them. The windmill's frame weighed about 90 pounds, and the only way to hoist it up to the tower was by rope and pulley. Do you know what a pulley is? It's kind of like a little wheel, and you can have a rope going over it like that, so that when you pull down, the thing, whatever you have attached to the rope on the other side, it's easier to pull it up. Pulley. I didn't have any rope, so I had to borrow my mother's wire clothesline instead. I fastened one end to a crude handle that I'd made on the windmill from a piece of bamboo. I climbed the tower with the other end and looped it over the top rung, then dropped it down to Gilbert. From where I stood, I could see over the trees to where the patchwork of fields and forest joined the highlands. "Okay, Gilbert," I yelled, "bring it up." Slowly, he began to pull. The bamboo handle lifted in the air, followed by the large, gangly frame. "Easy now." Geoffrey stood below me on a lower rung to guide the machine as it climbed. The three of us now pulled with all our strength. "Come on, guys," I shouted. "Let's see those muscles." "I'm pulling as hard as I can," said Gilbert, straining under the weight. "Don't let it slip, Geoffrey." With each pull, the windmill lurched sideways and banged its cumbersome blades against the wood. A couple of times they got stuck in the rungs, and Geoffrey had to knock them loose. Little by little, it made its way up the tower. After half an hour, we finally had it close to the top. When it came within reach, I grabbed the handle and screamed to Gilbert, "Tie it down!" Gilbert looped the wire around the base pole, and the windmill held. Geoffrey joined me at the top to secure the machine in place. The day before, we had drilled 2 holes in the wooden poles. My hot nail drill wasn't big enough, so I had to use flat bolts instead, a process that took hours. We'd also asked Mr. Godston to cut 2 matching holes in the bicycle's crossbar with his welding gun. Standing atop the tower, Geoffrey fished the nuts and bolts from his pocket while I held the frame and tried to align the holes. I could feel it slipping. "Hurry, this thing is heavy," I said. Geoffrey slid the bolts and tightened them with a wrench. Once everything was fastened, we looked at each other and smiled. The machine felt sturdy and very strong. While Geoffrey made his way down the tower, I remained atop my perch to take in the scenery. To the north, I could see the iron sheet roofs of the trading center and the rows of brown huts that sat behind the market. As I admired the view, I noticed something strange. A line of people had emerged and were heading in my direction. They must have seen the tower from the distance and were curious to have a look. "We have visitors," I said. Within minutes, a dozen people gathered at the base and gazed up at the machine. I recognized a few of them as traders and shopkeepers. One was named Kalino. "What is this thing called?" What is this thing?" he asked. Since there's no word in Chichewa for windmill, I used the phrase magesti a mfepo. "Electric wind," I answered. "What does it do?" "Generates electricity from the wind." "That's impossible," Kalino said, laughing. He turned to get a reaction from the crowd. "It looks like a radio tower. What kind of silly toy is that?" Well, I said, just stand back and watch. I climbed down from the tower and ran into my room for the final piece. That morning, I'd found a thick reed and cut a section about 10 inches long. I then wrapped a long copper wire around the base of a headlamp bulb and strung it through, creating a light socket. Holding the socket and bulb, I climbed the tower and connected their wires to the ones from the dynamo. As I worked, more and more people arrived, and I could hear their chatter. "What do you suppose he's doing now?" asked a farmer named Banda. "This is the misala from the scrapyard my children were talking about." Remember, misala means like a crazy person. Another man answered, "Think about his poor mother." Peering out, I saw my parents and sisters at the back of the crowd. Their eyes were wide, and their jaws hung slightly open, the way some soccer fans look when clustered around a radio. Except this time, it was me who had the ball, with only seconds left on the clock. My hands trembled from nerves, but I was confident. I prepared for this moment for months. "Let's see how crazy this boy really is," I heard someone shout. Isn't that from the beginning of the book? That's right. It's back in the prologue. Anyway. A steady wind whistled through the tower, mixing the smells of chain grease and melted plastic. Even though the wheel remained locked, the machine groaned against the breeze, as if begging me to release it. I looked down at Gilbert and Jeffrey and nodded. "Here it goes," I thought. I jerked the wheel loose, and the blades began to spin. The chain snapped tight against the crankset, and the tire slowly turned. Everything happened in slow motion. "Come on," I said. "Don't embarrass me now." Just then, a strong gust flung me backward. The tower began to rock, so much that I wrapped my elbow around a rung just to hang on. Inches above my head, the blades began to buzz like a set of angry propellers. I clutched the bulb, waiting for my miracle. Then it came. A flicker, a flash, then a burst of bright, magnificent light. My heart nearly exploded. "Look!" someone shouted. "He's made light!" "It's true what he said!" A group of children pushed through the crowd. "Look how it spins! Let me see!" I threw my hands into the air and shouted with joy, laughing so hard that I became dizzy. I held the bulb in triumph and addressed the unbelievers. "Electric wind!" I shouted. "I told you I wasn't mad!" One by one, the people began to cheer. They waved their hands and shouted, "Wachitabuina! Well done!" "You did it, William!" "That's right," I said, "and now I'm going bigger. Just wait and see." The crowd shouted questions, then gathered around Gilbert and Jeffrey, grilling them for details. Those two guys couldn't stop grinning. I stayed on the tower, listening to the blades and taking in the scene. I finally came down when the bulb started to burn my hand. My wire wasn't long enough to use the bulb anywhere but the windmill, so late in the afternoon, I attached it to the top rung and left it. I was still so high from the experience that I went to the trading center to burn off some energy and relish in the glory. Once I reached the market stalls, I looked back to the valley and saw the light still flickering through the heat waves. "What is that thing?" said a man nearby, clutching a sack of tomatoes. "It's catching the wind just like a helicopter." The tomato seller was my mother's friend, Maggie. Well, the owner is right here. Why don't you ask him? Is this true? He said. How is that possible? I explained it to him the way I did everyone. I still don't understand, he said. I need to come see for myself. For the next month, about 30 people arrived each day to stare up at the light. How did you manage such a thing? They all asked. Hard work and lots of research, I replied, trying not to sound too smug. Many of them were traveling businessmen from other districts. To them, the windmill became a kind of roadside attraction while passing through Wimbe. Other people came from outer villages with chickens and maize strapped to their bicycles. Women balancing sacks of flour on their heads stopped and spoke with my mother. God has blessed you, one said. You have a child who can perform wonders. You'll never complain about kerosene again. The men approached my father. Your son made this? Yes. Where did he get such ideas? From books. They teach this in school? No, he did this on his own. That month, I helped clear the fields and prepare them for planting, working each day with joy in my heart. If I was in the fields near the windmill, I would pause in between swings of my hoe and just watch it spin. One night I was playing bawo with Jeffrey and Gilbert near the barber shop when the lights went out from a power cut. While everyone was cursing the dark, I snuck home and connected the bulb, then ran back. Oh, I hate those power cuts, a man complained, leaving the barber shop with only half a haircut. What power cuts? I said with a smile. Have you chaps seen my house? Mr. Ipunga, the barber, leaned out his shop, still clutching his dead clippers. William, I think you take pride in our power cuts just so you can boast about your electric wind. Perhaps. The next month, I started working on lighting my house using the windmill. To do this, I needed loads and loads of electrical wire. But as usual, I had no money to buy any. Then, one afternoon, Gilbert and I were at Charity's house when I noticed long sections of copper-insulated wire, the very kind I needed, being used as a clothesline. In fact, a whole spool of the stuff sat in the corner of the room. Hey, man, I said to Charity, how can you play around with this wire when I need it so much? Someone had given it to him as payment for Ganyu, he said. But since you're my cousin, I'll give you a discount. I was on my way to the trading center to look for a job when Gilbert pulled out 100 kwacha and gave it to Charity. Just like that, I had 30 meters of copper wire. I promise I'll pay you back, Gilbert, I said. Don't worry about it. Just put lights in your room. Once again, when all hope seemed lost, Gilbert came to the rescue. I ran toward home, clutching the heavy spool. As I flew down the trail and into the valley, I could see the windmill spinning in the distance. Now, every time I saw it, my stomach did a flip. I unspooled the wire enough to measure the distance from the windmill to my room, then clipped it with my knife. Clutching one end, I climbed the tower. A windmill in motion was a hazardous work environment. The blades were spinning so fast, I had to be careful, or else I'd end up with a haircut. Also, the dynamo was producing real electricity. As I unhooked the bulb and attached the new wire, I was mindful not to cross them, or I'd get a shock. To be extra safe, I wrapped a jumbo bag, which is plastic and doesn't conduct electricity, around the junction where the wires tied together. The roof of my bedroom was made from pallets of grass wrapped in plastic sheeting, each supported by several wooden beams. Standing on a ladder, I wrapped the wire 2 turns around the middle beam, the one nearest my bed, then popped a hole through the pallet and lowered it down into my room. Inside, I made some final attachments, then pulled the bulb from my pocket. I may not be touching the wall to get light, I thought, thinking back to Gilbert's light switch, but this is close enough. I connected the reed and bulb, and in an instant, my room was illuminated. I ran to the door and slammed it closed, then marveled at the new electricity. For the first time ever, I had my own lighted space. That evening after supper, I lay in bed and just stared up at the bulb. It flickered yellow to the rhythm of the spinning blades outside, bright enough to read the library books I'd stacked up around me. I heard a knock at the door, and soon my family had crowded into my room. "Look, it's William staying up past dark," my father said. "Congratulations," said my mother. "We'd also like to have lights in our rooms. Think you can manage?" "Only if you're okay with having electricity generated by a madman." She laughed. "Hey, you proved us all wrong in the end. But I'll admit, I did worry." My sister Rose then asked, "What if the wind stops blowing?" It was an important question. "The light will go off," I said, "and I'll be stranded. That's why I have plans for getting some batteries." More specifically, I needed something like a car battery so I could store power for the times when the wind was calm. A car battery was also big enough to power the entire house. Once I had one, my family could finally toss out those kerosene lamps and live like modern people. And lights were just the first step. The next windmill would pump water for our fields and give us more food. Windmills would be our front line against hunger. The first night with light, I stayed awake reading Explaining Physics, trying to prepare for my next step. I read for hours, long after everyone else was asleep, while the termites feasted on the roof and clouds of red dust pushed under the door. As usual, a strong wind was blowing.